World War II paratroopers, elite fighters from the air. Many novel and inventive military strategies were developed during World War II, but few were as audacious or famous as airborne operations. Highly skilled paratroopers who jumped from planes far behind enemy lines became emblems of elite infantry, relying on surprise, agility, and sheer bravery to complete their objectives. These airborne troops, whether American, British, or German, were instrumental in reshaping the battlefield, carrying out raids, capturing important targets, and obstructing enemy operations. Every country created its strategy for aerial battle, including parachute design, fighting tactics, and training and equipment. The distinctions among American, British, and German paratroopers reflected their different military ideologies, but they all had one thing in common: an unwavering spirit, unrelenting training, and a readiness to leap into the unknown. This comparison highlights the influence they had on the outcome of the conflict by examining their distinct tactics, advantages, and disadvantages. A paratrooper had to make it to the drop zone, more precisely, to the ground safely, before they could engage in combat. The parachutes used by American, British, and German paratroopers all worked from a static line. The parachute would automatically deploy as the trooper stepped out of the aircraft because a line would be drawn between them and the aircraft, which would then get taut from the trooper's weight. A paratrooper would never be in freefall. Circular parachutes with restricted maneuverability would be employed to keep the paratroopers from dispersing and, ideally, landing in a single group. This was done on purpose. But there were some distinctions. In contrast to the British and American harnesses, which were tied to the parachute with 2 points at the shoulder, the German Fallschirmjäger's harness was fastened at a single point in the middle of the back. This meant that the German paratrooper would fall on his hands and feet, or more precisely, knees into a forward roll, after leaving the aircraft, which was often a Junkers Ju 52, head first. This is why leather or thick canvas knee pads were a typical component of the Fallschirmjäger's equipment. Compared to their Allied counterparts, the German approach allowed the paratroopers to descend at lower altitudes, reducing the amount of time they were in the precarious position of floating to the earth. The drawback of this fall and landing technique was that the German paratrooper could only carry a pistol, a gravity knife, and a few grenades with him during the drop. This was mostly because the paratrooper had to roll during the landing, and a weapon like a big rifle may get caught in the parachute lines or hurt someone. Rifles, submachine guns, and other heavier weapons would be dropped separately in designated containers. The Fallschirmjäger was at risk during the more than a minute it took for early iterations of the harness to come off. This harness system was altered to be removed in less than 10 seconds following a catastrophic airborne operation in Crete. Additionally, they were considerably less able to steer than their Allied counterparts because of the single riser. By contrast, the British and Americans would land on the ground in the same manner after stepping out of their aircraft, which was typically a modified Whitley bomber or a Douglas C-47 Skytrain, feet first. But there were also discrepancies between the British and American equipment. The double bag arrangement of the X-type parachute was employed by the British. The rigging would be released by the first bag to deploy, followed by another bag that held the canopy that was fastened to the static line. Compared with the Americans' single-bag T-7 parachute, this was a far more dependable and less startling arrangement. Additionally, the British paratrooper were able to disconnect from the parachute far faster than their American counterparts, since the X-type harness had a quick release that the T-7 did not. Both the American and British paratroopers were able to descend with rifles and submachine guns, which allowed them to engage in combat as soon as they touched down, in contrast to their German counterparts. This configuration's drawback was that they had to descend from a greater altitude, which left them more exposed and gave the opponent more time to be ready, depriving them of the element of surprise. Additionally, many paratroopers would drown after landing in lakes, marshes, or flooded places because they were entangled in their parachutes and unable to remove themselves, despite their quick-release harness and optimal landing position. Although paratroopers wore steel helmets for protection, the sorts of helmets they wore could differ significantly from those of their traditional infantry counterparts because of the nature of their tasks. Specialized helmets were provided to both the British and German paratroopers. The characteristic flared edges and prominent rims of the standard issue Stahlhelm and Brodie helmets were too drag producing for airborne combat. In contrast to ordinary infantrymen, British and German paratroopers were equipped with rimless helmets, which were more aerodynamic and possibly the most noticeable distinguishing characteristic of a paratrooper. The Allies realized they were facing an elite group of Fallschirmjäger instead of the regular Wehrmacht when they saw the German helmets, because they were so different from the standard Stahlhelm. Based on the standard issue M1 helmet, the Americans used either the M2 helmet or the M1C. The most noticeable changes were a thicker liner and a Y-shaped four-point chin strap that kept the helmet from flying off during a jump, even though it was already rimless. One item of gear that all paratroopers wore was a pair of special jump boots. They were always calf length, far longer than an average infantryman's boot, though the precise design did differ from country to country. Blousing or tucking pant legs into boots to prevent them from flying around during a jump became a sign of being jump qualified. This was done to brace the ankle and prevent injury following the impact of a jump. They carried the same weaponry as the regular infantry of their country, because paratroopers are light infantry. The Fallschirmjäger 42, or FG-42, is a specialized weapon that was developed as a result of the German Fallschirmjägers' experience. The FG-42 was designed to be a multi-purpose weapon that would allow a rifleman to wield the firepower of a machine gun. Because of its complexity, it was manufactured in small quantities, but the lessons learned helped create contemporary assault rifles. Nations continued to utilize paratroopers after the war, but the concept of floating to the ground while hung under a silk canopy was rendered obsolete with the development of dependable helicopter transport. Nevertheless, infantry, special forces, or any other superior unit still studies their accomplishments. They represented the infantry elite and will always be a memorable representation of a very particular period in military history, regardless of the country they served.